But yeah, I'm just going to sort of get us started with today's session. And I am Naomi Isaacs. I'm a brand strategist at Soapbox, and I will be moderating the discussion today that we've given the somewhat grand title of Think Tanks and the Power of Imagination. And just quickly, for those of you who don't know Soapbox, we are a design and communications agency, and we work almost exclusively with think tanks or people doing think tanky type things. And for today's session, it is my privilege to be joined by two wonderful speakers who will be speaking and sparking our imaginations. Firstly, we have Brian Reich with us. And Brian is a man of many talents. He is VP of Communications at Murmuration, a strategist, a speechwriter. He was previously Director of Policy Communications for Bloomberg 2020, and he's the author of this brilliant book that I have with me here, The Imagination Gap, which explores how we can unlock and use the power of our imagination to make extraordinary things happen. And within this book that Brian will, I'm sure, expand upon more when he speaks, it really explores the importance of using and applying our imagination with, references along the way to everything from John Locke to the film Dirty Dancing, to Arthur C. Clarke, to the structure of jazz music. It's a really brilliant book. I will put a link in the chat as we go through if people want to hear more. And we're also joined by Rose Abdollahzadeh from Chatham House. And Rose is the Managing Director of Research Partnerships and co-directs their SNF Collab project. And Rose will be speaking a little bit more about that. But that project really encompasses, I think, some really interesting, really exciting work with imagination at its heart. So thinking about, how we can imagine better futures, but also, sparking and sharing ideas in ways that are really imaginative, really new and collaborative and immersive and experimental. And both Rose and Brian today are going to be talking about this idea of imagination. And imagination is something that we all have. That's we all have a unique form of that, and something we've always had as a species. And it's a very powerful tool to think about big shifts and alternative possibilities. It can help us grapple with big societal challenges that might feel far removed from our everyday lives, or might feel kind of abstract and intangible and unfathomable in some way. And imagination can also help when we come to think about bringing those ideas, and in this case, thinking about bringing evidence to life in ways that feel really powerful and really human and really wonderful at the same time. So it's a big concept and a very powerful one as well, which Rose and Brian will be exploring more on. So for today's session, please continue to put in questions, comments, observations in the chat throughout both the sessions. We're going to sort of do a Q&A at the end, so we'll pick those things up afterwards, but drop things in that chat as we're going through, and we can sort of go through towards the end once Rose and Brian have spoken through their parts. So I'm going to kick things off by asking for Brian to get us started, and he's going to be sharing his take on imagination. So over to you, Brian.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having me. I am a longtime fan and occasional co-conspirator on things with Soapbox, so very honored to be here. I'm going to try and set up the conversation. I got a sneak peek at some of what Rose is going to show, and it's very exciting and very impressive. And so I'm going to give sort of a conceptual start, and then she's going to, I think, be much more sort of practical in demonstrating how some of this comes out. As Naomi mentioned, I wrote a book called The Imagination Gap, and the reason that I actually embarked on that journey was because as a strategist and a communications person, it sort of always came naturally to me that one of my responsibilities to the people that I was working with was to pitch ideas. And to me, the bigger and the more sort of fanciful the ideas were, the better, because the potential was there to sort of think of anything, and then what we ultimately executed could be less, but you needed to go big. And what I started to hear over and over and over again was this simple phrase: I can't imagine. I can't imagine why we would do that. I can't imagine how we would do that. And it struck me that, while there were lots of reasons why a client or a partner might not do something, there wasn't sufficient funding, there wasn't time, there wasn't training, et cetera. The idea that you wouldn't be able to imagine, or that you wouldn't be willing to imagine something, seemed very frustrating to me. And so I started to become obsessed with the topic of imagination. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is that imagination is actually one of the things that is least understood and least studied in all of the kind of brain sciences. There's a lot of focus on creativity. There's a lot of focus on organization and things like that. Imagination, there are very few experts or bits of research on it. So I went and I wrote this book, and I dug into it. And what I came up with is the answer to the question of what is imagination is that it is our greatest natural resource. We all have the tools to produce and use our imagination. They are boundaryless. They are unique to each person and the experiences and the inputs that they have. And so the power of imagination is something greater than I would argue, really exists anywhere with anything. And it is naturally recurring. Your imagination will always fire and continue to fire as long as you help to cultivate it and treat it as such. And so obviously when you have something that is your greatest natural resource, you also have the potential to create just about anything out of it. And so that is where I want sort of everyone's thinking around imagination to start. What I also want to make sure people understand is that people confuse imagination and kind of use the term very loosely. Imagination is not the same thing as creativity. Creativity is the output, is the expression of imagination. Imagination is that spark. It's the initial concept, the initial idea, the initial inkling of something. And then you bring it to life through creativity. There are no rules for who has imagination or who has a good or bad imagination. So it's not about your intelligence, or if someone has more experience, they necessarily have a larger imagination. It is not a skill or a talent or a process. It's not something that you go to school for. You have seen probably any number of books in the business section of the bookstore or the library, if they still exist, or on Amazon or whatever, that talk about the 14 steps to be more creative, or the degree in some form of creative expression, drawing, filmmaking, et cetera, et cetera. Those all benefit from and require some use of your imagination, but they are not the same thing. You can't learn imagination. It's just natural there. And imagination is not the same thing as innovation. There's a great obsession, particularly in business, with innovation over the last, say, decade or more. And innovation is incredibly important. It is the incremental improvement of things that we already know, right? So we know that we can get to the moon. Now we need to get to Mars, or we know that we can get to the moon, but we need to live on the moon and build out societies there. Those are not dramatically imaginative, new, never before seen things. Those are important, but still incremental improvements on the things that we already know. So imagination is, this big, grand, and very early in any, idea or conversation. That is where that spark comes from, and thus it has probably the greatest potential to shape and guide the ways that we go about in doing things. The book ultimately is about how we do not use our imagination enough. And how did we get here? There are three primary reasons. One, we're not using it to our fullest. So our imagination is constantly firing. It is, bigger and in many cases scarier than what people are willing to acknowledge. And so we kind of contain it. We don't share all of those grand ideas. We worry what people are going to think. We hold ourselves back. So we're not using our imagination or applying it to its fullest. Two, we are actively shutting people's imagination down. I don't think that is malicious, but anytime you've ever sat in a meeting and you've come up with an idea and someone has said, sorry, that's not how we do things, or I don't know why we would have that conversation. That is sending a very clear message that these imaginative ideas are not welcome, and that you should sit on your hands. And that has a very chilling effect on people's willingness and ability to use their imagination. And third, we are suffering, I mentioned innovation, we're suffering from innovation fatigue. We are so obsessed with the constant iteration and the incremental improvement of the way that things that exist in the world today are going to be, that we are so tired that we just don't even realize that there are many bigger, grander, more extraordinary opportunities out there to think about. But make no mistake, there are, and we need them. We need to use them much more. So what can imagination do? Imagination can literally do anything. In fact, there is an argument that I would make that all of human society is the product of imagination. Language, religion, architecture, politics, and the whole, good and bad divisions of the world. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Vaccines are, the product of someone's imagination, and then ultimately the creative expression and the expression of science. So without imagination, we actually risk the progress that society might take. We risk the ability to, evolve and explore and experience extraordinary things. So what does that mean? What do we do? One, imagination is going to happen. Let it, right? A lot of people, have these scary thoughts in their head and they try to tamp them down. Don't let those scary thoughts come out. In fact, spit them out and write them down. You need to feed and capture and share and appreciate and embrace imagination for it to, reach its full potential. By feed it, I mean, you need to have different experiences. You need to go to museums. You need to go out in nature. The biggest thing that curbs our imagination is actually falling into patterns. So if you commute to work every day, the same route, you get on the tube and you go from your home to the office and back each night, and that's all you do, at some point you will get into essentially autopilot and your imagination won't fire as much. But if you take a bike one day, or if you drive in a car, or if you just decide to walk, you will actually notice the difference in the way your brain starts to fire and the ideas that populate it. Capturing it and sharing it, if your imagination only sticks in your head, it is not going to benefit anyone else. And what we are actually seeing is the power of collective imagination. So if I say something and Rose picks up on that, she's going to have another set of ideas that's going to complement that and make it better. My imagination may not have all the components that you need to formulate an actual plan, but it may spark something in somebody else that's going to lead to something extraordinary. And then just appreciating and embracing it. As I said, it's the greatest natural resource we have. We should be more excited about it. We should be studying. We should be celebrating the power and the potential of imagination the way I think this conversation is, much more every day, all the time, with everybody. And to do that, I would just urge you to make imagination a part of everything. Make it a part of your home life, make it a part of your work life, your relationships and your conversations, right? There is no reason why you shouldn't dream big. And then you can worry about how you pursue these things and what's practical, as a secondary or tertiary issue. But let imagination flourish and be a part of everything. And when we do that, a lot of things are going to happen that are not currently happening. A lot of things are going to be possible that are not currently possible. So I will stop there. As I said, I think Rose has some really, interesting and exciting things to share. So I want us to get to that. And then I'm happy to answer questions and, spitball and come up with ideas and do whatever it is that folks want to. So thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brian. I'm feeling very kind of powered up by that and optimistic about it. I think it was sort of interesting you talking about, falling into patterns and actually, how I think particularly the sort of ways that we've been working over the past year, how important it is to sort of get out of those sort of ways of working and to sort of, change our ways of thinking about things to sort of spark our imaginations. I think that's something that's really interesting.
There was actually a term that was making the rounds recently, at least I'm over here, I'm in the United States, called languishing, which is sort of between normal behavior and depression, right? You're not actually depressed, but you're not firing on all cylinders. You're not as energetic, and you're not, your imagination is not as there. And a lot of people are languishing now after having been inside, you know, and mostly, if not entirely, working from home, or only, frankly, working on screens, right? Our whole interaction in life is now through screens, so there's less reading of books, and there's less experiencing of you know, culture and overhearing conversations and those things that are just ingredients. So yeah, it's totally reasonable if people are feeling that, you know, and I think as the world begins to open up that much more, I think we will see imagination flourish, and hopefully be embraced in really exciting ways.
Fantastic. Rose, I think I'm going to sort of hand over to you. As I said at the beginning, Rose has been the sort of driving force behind Chatham House's brilliant SNF collab project. So she is going to share some of her experiences and pearls of wisdom on that now. So Rose, over to you.
Thanks. And the sun's come out just as I speak. So there we go. Yeah, I think one thing I just wanted to touch on from what Brian said there was that, yeah, you can imagine the worst and you can imagine the best. And actually, something unrelated to what I'm going to talk about the rest of the time is actually worst case planning, right? And think tanks tend to be quite good at bad news and sort of arm waving about potential risks. One thing we've found, which I'm sure loads of people also in the group have found, is that rather than just producing reports, actually running very either role-playing or tabletop exercises that are scenario or simulation based is a really fantastic tool in terms of getting people to really imagine what a worst case scenario could be and how they would then react to that. And what we've found through our experience anyway of doing that is that people that participate in that, they take it on so much more. They take on board those lessons so much more than just attending a workshop or you know, reading one of your reports. So definitely it works in the worst case scenario element, but I want to focus more on the best case scenario element. So one thing at Chatham House, which is where I'm from, we're international affairs think tank based in London. One thing that we're really keen on is to shift our work to be really proactively solutions oriented. So rather than just providing analysis and commentary and interesting you know, new data and evidence-based research, which obviously is our bread and butter, really, to also drive a conversation about solutions and what should be done about these things. So last year, actually, we launched the SNF collab funded by Stavros Niarchos Foundation, as you might have guessed from the name. And the aim of that really is to push us as an organization to imagine a better future and imagine a better world, and then to think about how we can get many other types of audiences involved in helping us think about that. So some of the ways that we're doing, that we've approached it, is to try and come up with different types of outputs. So to stretch ourselves to come up with things that are immersive, that do give you a sense of what would it be like to be in a different world, and what do I feel like in that world, and do I like it, and if this is what I want to happen, then to Brian's point, you then get onto the how. But the first issue is around trying to spark a conversation about what, you know, what kind of future are we all trying to build in our various ways. So one element is around different types of outputs, and one element is also about working with non-traditional partners to really try and spark a different type of conversation and to build on each other's imagination. And so a couple of examples of that are, I'll just put a link in once I finish rambling about I'll link to this stuff, but we did a series of videos that we'll be doing as an annual effort called Imagining a Better World. So they're attempts to get our researchers to really push the boat out and say, can I imagine a world without fake news? Can I imagine a world where we never have a global pandemic again? can I imagine a world where our food system works? So rather than taking the kind of negative risk approach to say, well, if we want these things to happen, how would they feel and how would they look like? And then how do we get there? What are the main things that would need to change? And really, are we already in a position globally for those things to be happening? In which case, why aren't they? So to try and change the framing in a way of some of the topics that we're looking at day to day. And in terms of another type of output, we've just launched actually last week something called the London Futurescape, which was something we did for our 100-year anniversary. So 2020 was Chatham House's 100-year birthday. And we thought that rather than, we did some, looking back at our history and things, but we thought, well, why not look to the future? Because we're really at this very critical point in so many aspects of these big trend developments. So how are we going to make that shift to sustainable lifestyles? How are we going to navigate living with technology? And how is the world going to feel when we're so much an urban society? And how are we going to marry community and our sort of economic activity with this increased urbanization? So we've created an interactive model called the London Futurescape, and it takes you through, you follow a family through 3 generations, and it takes you through some of these trends through the next 100 years. And we've based it in Piccadilly Circus, first of all, because Chatham House is based around the corner from Piccadilly Circus. So we were pining for our usual environment, all stuck at home. And also because it's an area that a number of people recognise, even if they've not been there. So it's, in a sense, supposed to just be indicative of what's a city centre like, one of these big global city centres. What could they feel like for the next 100 years? And we have based it on a lot of our own researchers inputting, and we got loads of different types of people to participate and support the development of those scenarios. But really, the aim of it is just to say, look, these are the trends that are happening, and how do you as an individual want them to develop? Because the decisions that we make today are going to impact how they play out. So let's imagine what would happen if we make good choices today, and what are those good choices from your perspective? And then the final thing that I just wanted to flag that we've been trying out this year is on the non-traditional partnership side. So we've partnered with the London Design Biennale, and it was right at the point of the pandemic, sort of really flaring up and showing that it wasn't going to just be a flash in the pan thing. And we thought that what we could do together is to call out to anyone and say, have you got an idea that the crisis has really brought to life? Like, can we harness the creativity that comes from being in crisis? So while we're now potentially in this languishing phase, in the summer, we were all in this kind of like, wow, I really didn't imagine that this would ever be how we were all living. So how am I feeling about this, and what's come out of it? So we got 500 submissions from over 50 countries, 5 continents. There was no award or anything like that. We've put them up on a website, and we'll be featuring some of them in a physical exhibition in London. But there was no real driver for people to participate beyond their desire to share their ideas and to present things that they had either been working on or had really kind of come to the fore, and that they just figured out during the pandemic. And we still have an open call to under 18s, because our experience anyway is that a lot of the most imaginative ideas come from the younger people younger generations in our communities. So we were really bowled over with that. And it's been an opportunity for Chatham House to try and link some of these big policy conversations that we're having with a design community, and with artists and others that have put their ideas forward. So yeah, I will just put a couple of links into the chat. So if people want to have a look at any of those things I've mentioned there, they're welcome to. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Rose. And I think the Piccadilly Circus, I was playing around with that, I think last week or the week before when it was launched. And it's I definitely recommend you all check it out. It's a great sort of platform, and I think it kind of really sort of helps bring to life some of those ideas and sort of, you know, gets you immersed in thinking about those big questions. And I'd like to just follow up on something that you were just speaking about, Rose, and something that you touched on Brian, when, you know, Brian, you spoke a bit about the kind of collective imagination, and then just there, Rose, you were talking about sort of working in collaboration and sort of partnerships with others. I'd be interested to get kind of both your thoughts in terms of kind of the role of collaboration when we think about imagination and thinking about coming up with new ideas and new ways of thinking. And I guess kind of, as you said, Rose, kind of harnessing those ideas that are out there, particularly amongst young people. So perhaps, Rose, you can get started, and then Brian, you could come in on.
Sure. Well, I think all think tanks have their own flavour, but Chatham House is definitely seen as a forum for convening as much as a research institute. And so it's kind of part of our DNA that what we provide is a place for people to share ideas. But that's always, up till quite recently, been in a very closed group of people that are all kind of working on the same thing. And we know that, I mean, I'm sure it's always been the case, but it's definitely the case that now that there are so many people in society that need to be part of these conversations that we're having about the way that policy is going, the way that international affairs is going. And so it really is an important role for an organisation like ours, that we use our platform to try and spark that kind of idea, cross-pollination, and try and do that in a way that, brings very different perspectives to the table.
Yeah, no, I think the convening and the responsibility to bring people together is huge. I think the mistake a lot of groups have made in the past is trying to overstructure those conversations, to say, we only want, ideas in this format, or we only want ideas around this particular question and nothing else has value. I actually think there's an opportunity when you are participating in something with Chatham House, say as an example, right, on the back end of that conversation, to find all sorts of additional new unanticipated prompts for ideas and conversations that might happen next. So the more that you open it up and kind of keep it freewheeling, while also, prompting people, giving people a little bit of direction or similar is huge. And so a lot of times it's not so much that maybe the ideas or the responses that people come up with are germane to the conversation, but they still have other value. You just have to kind of work them in a different angle. It's sort of, all the stuff on the cutting room floor has as much value as what ultimately makes it into the thing that you see on screen, sort of metaphorically.
And I just wanted to pick up on a question that came through in the chat that Brian, you responded to, but perhaps you could just sort of speak a little bit about that, just in case anyone missed that. But it was a question from Verity when we were speaking earlier about sort of getting out of our kind of routines and our patterns, and thinking about, how we can sort of change things up at the moment when things are limited. So perhaps you could speak a little bit more about that for everyone.
Yeah, so look, I mean, there are many different ways to break your patterns. Some of it, is a change of scenery, which is, I think, optimal, right? So if you're living in a city and you can get out to a place that is not, constantly filled with sirens and things like that, you will feel that difference. At the same time, if you move from the city out into the country or into the forest, it won't be long before you fall into that pattern. So there's this need for movement. Obviously, things like travel, significant travel. In our case in the United States, for a long time it was sort of frowned upon to even cross state lines, quite a bit. Now that we can get out more, I think those different experiences are going to be helpful. But even without travel, change in format matters a lot. Change in, so if you spend all day on screens, as I do, I make a point to read books and magazines, and your brain responds to words in print very differently than on the screen. I am a big nonfiction, news, politics person. I'm obsessed with it. It's part of my work. I have made a lot of effort to read more about arts and culture and science and things that have literally no impact on my day, and it sends me off in another direction. Even something as basic as making dinner. I have sort of made a personal commitment not to repeat the things that I'm making for dinner, or the pictures that I'm taking. I have a different background photo on my Zoom meetings every day. And it forces me to look for different things and to go, literally out in the, within a square block of where I am. There's a million different potential things that I would not consider if I wasn't working extra hard to kind of feed my imagination. And, I'm not going to lie, I am languishing, like everyone else, by comparison to where I like to think my imagination is firing. But, sitting on my couch and sort of pouting about it doesn't get me anywhere. Going for a walk makes all the difference. Exercising makes all the difference. My brain starts to fire, and then off you go. So it's the little things that really do make a difference.
That Zoom background idea, it's just a kind of small, tangible thing, but that sort of, gets you out of your kind of typical kind of ruts in terms of ways of thinking. And I just wanted to pick up on something that, Brian, you sort of mentioned there and sort of came through, Rose, in what you were speaking about. As Brian, you spoke about kind of words and thinking about things there. And Rose, you spoke a little bit about framing as well when you spoke about things. So it'd be sort of interesting to get your perspectives in terms of, how kind of language and framing fits in with, this notion of how we might consider and think about things differently, and how that fits with imagination. Perhaps Rose, you want to sort of come in first on that?
Yeah, sure. I think in our case anyway, it's just about asking questions differently. So first of all, let's go back to the thing around collaboration. You don't really realize how specialized and kind of wonky your wording can be until you start to talk to someone else and they have no idea what you're saying. And so working with other organizations really challenges you and helps you to frame things, use language that cuts across silos and specialisms, which is obviously critical if you want to have a conversation that is going to spark great ideas, because you need to sort of both be able to sort of talk to each other. And then I think for us, it's also been again about trying to shift it to be a positive question. So rather than like, what are the biggest risks? What are the biggest opportunities? And why are they not being achieved? Or like, how could things be made much better, rather than what's the risk of things getting worse? Just so I know from our field, it's that's quite a different approach to what we've traditionally done anyway.
Yeah, no, I fully endorse all of that. I think the bigger, more open-ended the question, the better, because it encourages people to think at that much more expansive, forward-looking type of way. The other thing I would just suggest is I mentioned before that the things that come out of your imagination are rarely complete, right? They're not fully formed. intelligible thoughts. And so I'm a big fan of just people sharing, just spitting things out, and that includes as a prompt, and let people respond to that and let people build on that. So not even in the form of a question, but in the form of an idea, a what if. I mean, I guess that's a question technically, grammatically, but if I said, great, we've put a helicopter on Mars now, I'm still, a little bitter that they downgraded Pluto, from a planet to whatever it is. I bet there are 15 more planets out there, and let people just go to town on that, right? And it's not a fact-finding mission. It's not someone going out there and trying to prove me wrong. It's, oh, what would we name those planets? And I wonder what life would be like on those planets. And, if we could inhabit those planets, what would we build? And then off you go, right? Already the conversation is, is in a very different place than wherever you were. So I just think if you can put ideas out, if you can encourage people to put ideas out, then all of those become good starting points for imagination to flourish.
And I think, speaking of questions, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to pull out. And the first one here from John asking, how does imagining big ideas play out in a very partisan political context? And what about the risk of being misinterpreted? Who wants to go first on that one?
Resident political hack. I can start. I think, look, I think elections are really truly about ideas. It's about giving people a reason to believe that you as a candidate can deliver change, can deliver on whatever it is that is the promise. So whether it's, in our case, bridge to the 21st century, or a chicken in every pot, or hope, yes you can, yes we can, sort of things. I think that's a big deal. And look, it works equally on both sides. Donald Trump, for all of his many significant faults, in my view, painted this picture of a big wall, and then he went out and he got it, and people bought into the idea of the wall, and seized on that. There is always the risk of misinterpretation, but I think there's two parts to the conversation. There is the big imaginative idea piece, the getting people to believe, get them excited, get them bought in, and then there's the practical reality. And the reality is what we ultimately execute against, what we build, what we create, will always be different from where we start with our imagination. If it's not, then our imagination probably wasn't big enough to really change anything. So the risk of misinterpretation is outweighed by the fact that there are, if you will, almost safety valves in place, right? That the actual doing of the work, the actual building of it, is a much more involved process. And so I say, take the shackles off and just, dream up the world that you want to live in, or you think people want to live in, and and let people get excited, particularly when they're dissatisfied with the world that we currently live in, which I think across the board is almost certainly the case.
Rose, do you want to come in on anything from Brian, or the kind of broader question there?
Yeah, no, I would just agree that at the level of imagination, particularly like what we've tried to do with the Futurescape, for example, we know that there'll be people that disagree with aspects of it. Like we've put in there things around technology, things around the development of health technology, genetic engineering, and that sort of thing. Pre-vaccinated children, pre-vaccinated babies, which we know people will disagree with. But it's to say, well, this is a possibility, and then there are some pros to it and there are some cons to it. And I don't think it's not a healthy society where you can't have debates about how things should progress and how policy should react to some of these big questions that we have. So yeah, I would say it's not something we should shy away from just because there's a risk of being misinterpreted. it's just about then trying to encourage that conversation to be fruitful and to be actually engaging rather than just shouty.
Something you sort of both sort of mentioned, both in more you speak through things, but also just there is thinking about kind of hope and kind of, we both sort of spoke about spark a lot, which I guess kind of you associate when you think about imagination and kind of where that sort of spark begins. And I guess just picking up on some of the points that you've made, Brian, is thinking about how else can we really kind of spark our imaginations. And Rose, there's a question here from Verity in terms of how the SNF collab has had a sort of wider impact within organisational culture and the team at Chatham House in terms of sparking perhaps any changes there. So Brian, do you want to come in on that first, and then Rose can follow up on Chatham House?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's well, let me do a promo for the book in this way. Part of what I built into the book were a bunch of activities that encourage people to use their imagination, and in a lot of cases, the barrier that you get into is that you sort of keep coming up with ideas that feel very much the same, and you just kind of need to break through to get to the good part. So one of my favorite activities that I put into the book, two favorites. One is a t-shirt challenge, which is to just design a t-shirt every day. And you don't have to be an artist. I mean, the t-shirts that I design all have words on them. I'm a baseball fan, and one season for the first 100 games of the season, every game I came up with a new t-shirt based on where my team, the Seattle Mariners, were, who was pitching, if they were on a losing streak. Mariners have been on a losing streak for like 20 years, so there was a lot of options there. The other idea, the other prompt that I like is what I call the 100 ideas prompt, where you have to sit down and you have to come up with 100 ideas. And here's the thing, the first 20, 25, they'll flow pretty easily, right? There's sort of a backlog in your head. The next like 25 or 30 will be awful and painful, and you will want to give up. And then at some point, wherever, at 40 or 50 or 60, it's almost like you'll snap, right? Your brain will sort of just break, and all of a sudden new and radically different and wild and crazy ideas will come in. And so there's this forcing mechanism that comes from those types of prompts that are not normal, right? They're not like workplace deadlines. They're not like questions, even the best questions. They're just goals that you have to meet. And if you commit to the goal, it's going to force you to use your imagination in sort of extraordinary ways, because there's no other way to meet the goal. And again, most of those ideas may be crap, but the point is you got your brain firing. And if you get one idea out of that, if you get two, right, the whole exercise has been, incredibly valuable.
And Rose, do you want to come in on that sort of specific question or on anything there, but thinking about, I guess, how this project sort of, sparked and had a wider impact within the culture and team at Chatham House?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways. I mean, we're in our first year, so it's hard to talk about any kind of long-term impact on the organisation, but there are a couple of things. I'd say the first is that it's actually really fun, and more fun than some of the other work that our colleagues get up to. So engaging them in the collab activities they've really enjoyed, because it's just something very different from what they have been doing, and also this kind of positive framing, especially at this time when we're all feeling like, when we're all languishing, as Brian said, is really uplifting, and is something that people want to sort of lean into. And the second is the more what's the word, kind of is the competitive element of it, and it does quite well impact wise in terms of getting audiences. And so we're finding that our research colleagues and our colleagues working on communications and digital stuff are really keen to get involved because they want to learn from it. And that's one of the the underlying ambitions of the collab at Chatham House, that we use it to experiment with things, and things that really take off we'll then absorb into our business as usual and day to day. So yeah, I think we'll find over time that it has quite a big cultural impact, in that people start to see the real benefits of thinking about producing projects in a different way, and thinking, again, taking a slightly different framing to the more traditional approach, but also, yeah, that they just enjoy it, and so that's obviously, you want to make things enjoyable, so that's another really fantastic outcome from taking an imaginative approach to work.
I've been something you sort of referred to in that, Rose, but there's a question here from Luca in terms of, potentially sort of overcoming hurdles that you might face kind of organisationally, and actually sort of really getting buy-in into ideas. Do you have anything to kind of sort of tackle it from that?
Yeah, we found that there are some people that aren't up for it, and then there are some people that are, and so we've taken the easy route in the first year and worked with colleagues that are interested in it, and then we'll see in time if we can bring everybody on board. But rather than try and really face an uphill struggle, we've looked for people that are really keen, and that's not actually had a kind of generational, there's not been like a generational divide there. So we've had a lot of our or kind of seniority divide, so we've had a lot of our senior colleagues really excited about the approach, and about the idea of working with non-traditional partners, particularly in creative industries, and then we've had others that have just said, don't think it's that relevant to me at this time, and with what I'm working on Middle East conflict, I can't imagine a better future, so thanks but no thanks. And we might get there at some point, but yeah, I don't know if that answers Luca's question about overcoming hurdles, because I'm sort of avoided them, but it's one form of overcoming is to go around rather than over.
There's a kind of second part to Luca's question I'll sort of pose to you both, where he's asked sort of, what are your tips for bridging imagination with creativity that may help implementing what we imagine? Brian, do you want to come in on?
Yeah, no, it is a great question. I think one of the things, and it kind of picks up on what Rose was talking about in terms of, engaging with a diverse group of people. Everybody has a role to play in bringing an idea to fruition. Many times, I may have some crazy idea and literally have no, valuable skill to offer after that. And I hand it off to someone and they can go do it. It might change a little bit, but that's, whatever it is. And so I think there's sort of a divide and conquer mentality that I would encourage, right? There are people who can draw, there are people who can write, there are people who can project manage, right? All of these things are necessary and important to these things. And so if anything, it probably just requires you to get comfortable with other people taking and contributing to an idea, or you being comfortable, if you are more on the execution side, of working with someone else's, idea and kind of letting that go. So I would just go with divide and conquer, and really try and, have different people participating and contributing, which, historically has proven to just make it that much better.
And Rose, anything you want to sort of follow up with on that?
No, I don't think so. I think Brian said it all there. I mean, I just, from our experience, when particularly in our work with the London Design Biennale, having designers and then bringing our policy community to it, you're just bringing two types of problem solvers, or two types of actor that have different tools at their disposal. And so then the practicalities around like a way forward of how to make something a reality are far more interesting and potentially far more impactful than just by having that one group involved in the conversation.
Thank you. And there's something that Johanna's mentioned in thinking about an organisation called IDEO and how they approach brainstorming. It's bringing those people from different disciplines together, and what we were talking about earlier in terms of that collaboration, that collective imagination, and that really being the way to sort of piece the bits of the puzzle together to come up with something that is new. I guess there's a kind of alchemy type element to that. And I just wanted to pull up a couple of other things that have just come through in the chat, just observations, just to note those. Caroline shared an article on moral imagination by Medium. So I think, if anyone wants to check that out, that's in the chat. And Chiara has agreed with you, Rose, in terms of your approach, very zen, to sort of first start with your allies, and then you can move from there. And I think it's great to hear of the kind of successes that you've had with that project, and being able to sort of build that and kind of show that as a way to sort of bring people on board as and when is necessary. So I think that's about it in terms of questions we've had, and I'm conscious we are sort of approaching the hour. So I guess sort of Brian and Rose, I just wanted to check, do you have any final words that you'd like to share before we sort of close out the session?
So just in the spirit of collaboration, imagination, I mean, please feel free to get in touch with me and share your ideas and think about ways that we can work together, because I'm very, very open and would love to hear from you.
I would say totally the same. I just put my info in the chat. The other thing I would just say is, go big or go home, right? The biggest thing that I think stops people from using their imagination is just fear, right? Fear of being shut down, fear of sounding stupid, fear of the idea being silly, whatever. Like there should be no fear. We are far better off. History has shown it. We are far better off when people are sharing out those ideas. Some of the people that we regard as the most successful in the world started as being considered lunatics, and many of them probably are still considered lunatics, right? But they are transforming society, and they are transforming the history and the future. So just don't be afraid, right? And the more of us who are using our imagination and doing that, the better, and we'll be in the majority before long.
Wonderful. I think that is a great message to wrap things up on. Go big or go home. I'm definitely feeling fired up after that. But yeah, I think all that's really left to say is just to say thank you, everyone, for all your comments and observations and questions in the chat. That was brilliant. And of course, a big, big thank you to Brian and Rose for joining us and sharing their thoughts. That's been super fascinating. And I think really interesting to kind of get that kind of conceptual big view and hear some of your experience, Rose, in terms of what's been happening at Chatham House. So I'm definitely feeling like my imagination has been unlocked. As John's just mentioned, don't actually go home, do stay at the on Think Tanks conference. But yes, we hope to see you all soon, and thank you all again for taking the time and joining us. It's been great and a really fascinating discussion, so thank you.